Hey, I'm Dan, or Dandrew from the Dead Milkmen, and you are watching Crash and Bleed.
We're clearly not the master race. We're a little bit slow. We can't keep up with the pace. We're clearly not the master race. Yeah, I'm looking for a job, so get off of my case. We're clearly not the master race. A little bit slow. We can't keep up with the pace. We're clearly not the master race. Even Girl Scouts punch us in the face.
So, dude, you're in one of the most legendary punk bands of all time.
Wait, what?
Does it feel like you're in a legendary band?
It you know what? It kind of does sometimes because it in the most random places someone will talk, like someone will find out that like I'm a music teacher, and just last night one of the students' parents was like, "You never told me you were a rock star," and I was like, I didn't tell you that. I don't know. What am I supposed to do? Say, by the way. So he was like, yeah, I found out you're in the Dead Milkmen. I was like, yeah. But it just happens in the weirdest places too. Or like my sister like sees somebody with a Dead Milkman shirt and like, she's like, oh, I saw this person at like church or something, or like some, place you wouldn't expect. But that on top of the fact that I was like such a huge fan as a kid or as a teenager. And it still hits me sometimes. Like I'll look at the guys on the stage and be like, oh my God, like this is still crazy.
It's like, that's Rodney, but there's no long hair and no beard.
Yeah, but his voice to me sounds exactly the same. It's a great experience even to just be at practice, because Rodney, he just talks like when we're not playing a song, he's like talking and it's all like hilarious and he's like getting stuff off his chest. And then when we practice Bitch and Camaro, it's always like a different thing, in the beginning. And it's just great because it's like he's always on. And I feel like I always have my own like little Dead Milkmen performance happening that nobody else gets to see.
We should definitely start at the beginning here. Like, what was it like growing up for you? Where were you born? Like, how did you discover music as a kid?
I was born in a town called Voorhees, New Jersey. And I lived in Marlton, New Jersey until I was about 5. My parents, I have an older brother and an older sister, and we moved to Langhorne, Pennsylvania, which is in Bucks County. And my mom has always been musical. She was a piano teacher in our house, and she taught preschool music. She like directed choirs at the church. And both my parents were fans of listening to music too. They liked the Beatles and the Monkees and Donovan, and like ABBA and stuff. When I was about 7 years old, I started taking piano lessons. And then in 3rd grade, I started taking violin lessons. I was in like the orchestra at school. 4th grade, I started taking trumpet lessons. I played like handbells at the church where my mom was like the choir director, and yeah, it was all like that until I guess like the summer after 7th grade, maybe like 8th grade. I heard the Dead Milkmen through my cousin and just kind of fell in love. I heard the song "Watching Scotty Die" and I thought it was hilarious. And I made dubs, like I took blank cassettes and I copied the albums that he had and I listened to them, started like writing letters to them. And I guess I around 14, I started playing guitar, and I kind of quit the other instruments. Not like totally abruptly, but I just kind of was like getting away from that. Like I wanted to learn how to play guitar. So I bought like a $200 guitar and would sit at home listening to like Dead Milkmen records and figuring out stuff like Stewart, It's like do 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 do, like figuring out like lead stuff first because I didn't know how to do chords. Then I found myself kind of like playing other parts of the songs, and they were like bass lines. So I was like on the guitar, like learning Dave's bass lines to like Nutrition or like Serrated Edge, because they always, to me, they always kind of like drove the songs. Like the bass was so heavy and so melodic. Like there was so much melody with the bass lines. So yeah, I just kind of started listening to other music that I picked up from just like thinking, oh, this kind of sounds like the Dead Milkmen, and that got me into stuff like the Clash, and the Clash got me listening to like reggae and ska with the Specials, and then I feel like the Dead Milkmen was like my gateway. Like I had the Nirvana Nevermind tape when it came out. So I was like kind of into music, but before that, it was like I was listening to like classical music or like movie soundtracks and movie scores and stuff.
So the Dead Milkmen was the first punk band that you ever heard?
Yeah. Besides like hearing, like my brother, like he's like 7 years older than me. So, and he was getting into skateboarding in the 80s and listening to like Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden. But I was like his pesky little brother at times. So he kind of like didn't share stuff. And then I found out later, like when I was about like 15, so he would have been like 22. He like took me to a record store and he recommended like Circle Jerks and like Black Flag and Descendants. And so that was kind of cool. But yeah, Dead Milkmen were kind of like the gateway for me because I felt like there was something that like they didn't have a distinct style to me. It wasn't just like when I listened to Black Flag, I thought it was cool, but to me it was more like straightforward punk. Like it was just kind of like all the songs. Not that they all sound the same, but like the Dead Milkmen were doing like you've got like If You Love Somebody, Set Them on Fire, which is kind of like a reggae kind of thing. Like they changed it up, so that's something I always kind of looked for in bands, and also like bands that took themselves too seriously didn't stay with me very long. But I did like Minor Threat a lot.
I would have said the first Dead Milkmen album, shoot me, but I call it a hardcore album because you got like My Best Friend's a Junkie. That's like a full hardcore song, like violence. There's elements of hardcore in that, so like my hardcore collection bleeds straight into the Dead Milkmen because you can't categorize the Dead Milkmen. It's just like, what do you do? It's like that.
They're playing that music, but they're also saying, well, my mom and dad say if I eat all my food, I can go to a hardcore show, CFOD, which you can't help but appreciate the mockery in that, So that spoke to me more than, and NOFX. Like when I saw an album cover of theirs where the cow was wearing the Dead Milkmen shirt, I bought it because I was like, let's see what this band is like. They like the Dead Milkmen too, and I loved it and became a big fan of NOFX.
You became a fan of NOFX from the first album,
Liberal Animation, which is not that great now.
No, it's so hard to sit through. Like, they're my favourite band, but I have to start with S&M Airlines in '89 because that first one, oof, that's a rough listen.
But like what I was picking up was like that all over the place thing that album has a lot of. They do like that folky sounding thing, with like the So I just started to look for that kind of thing, that kind of spirit, and the Clash also like resonated in that way with me because they were experimenting with different styles, like they were all over the place. And they were serious, but they also, I felt like they didn't take themselves that seriously as far as like being technical with music, like they're just getting it out. Like, and that's another band I thought was like an expression,
Who would you have said was the most iconic punk rocker?
I guess possibly Iggy Pop, because I feel like he wouldn't even call himself that. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know him. I've never met him. apparently he's playing this festival we're playing in LA in June, which the lineup is nuts for this festival. Dude, check it out. I don't even know where to begin with the bands that are
what's
playing
it
this
called?
thing.
What's the festival?
No Values.
Like the Black Flag song.
Yeah, the Black Flag is playing the original Misfits.
What do you make of the Misfits? Like, Danzig's back in the band, or is he? Is he still there?
I don't know. The Misfits were a band that I definitely got into. I was probably my later teens. I was more like 18 or 19 when I started listening. A friend of mine lent me the box set that came out, and I dubbed that, and I got really into it. But then with all of I don't know, there was so much like I guess fighting between them. Then starting one formation of the Misfits, while Danzig was doing his own thing. But I mean, that's great that they're doing it. I haven't like gone to see them. I haven't like rushed out to see them, but I guess I can see them in June. But
So getting on to joining bands then, and your instrument of choice, like what made you pick up the bass?
I started teaching myself guitar, and actually the pastor at my parents' church gave me some guitar lessons, like how to play some chords. And my cousin Woods is his name. He was the one that introduced me to Dead Milkmen. And he has an older brother, Tim, who's also my cousin. Tim had gotten a drum set, this little like gold colored drum set. And Woods had been learning guitar, and the two of them, you know, they lived together still, they're brothers. Had been writing some like surf music, and I would go and visit them. Like we grew up like really close, like they're kind of like brothers to me. So I was like, hey, and I'm learning guitar too. So I started playing like rhythm guitar while he was doing like surfy like guitar stuff, and Tim's playing the drums in their parents' basement. And we were like, we should do something with this. We need a bass player, but like we should play some shows and stuff. I guess I was like 16. And the next thing you know, they booked a show. It was their parents were doing like a Christmas party, like some kind of Christmas party at a church, and it had a little stage, and they asked if we would be the band for it. So we played 3 songs. There were 2 originals, and we learned Surfin' Cow. But we didn't have a bass player, so I was like, you know what? I'll just play bass. So I borrowed my sister's friend's bass, and it was pink. And we played this, you know, this show. It was there were probably like 30 or 40 people there, but because it was like little surf music, like it's like inoffensive, you know. But from there, it got weird. We were called Baby's First Summer because it was something my grandfather used to say about this color green. Because I don't know if you've ever been around a baby in the summer, but like their diaper, like what's inside, kind of has this green color. So like my aunt was driving me home one time from their house. My cousins were in the car, and she was like, "Oh, Baby's First Summer," and we were like, "What?" And she pointed at a car that was that color, and we all looked at each other, and we decided that was going to be the name. And then we started getting like even weirder, and we changed the name to Farquhar Muck and Fuss, and it was still instrumental, like surfy stuff, but it was like fast, like crazy, sometimes complicated stuff. We had I had a big jumpsuit that had the name John on it, and these helmets that my cousin Tim had made, and one of them had a camera on the front, and we had monitors set up on the stage. It was all sorts of, we sometimes pyrotechnics. But the music, I don't know. This was like the mid to late 90s. And we would play these shows, and people didn't know what to think because you couldn't like dance to it. But there would be these like nice melodic, like surfy parts, but like really fast. And then it would go into like this thrash kind of thing. But Joe liked it. See, I was like writing letters to the Dead Milkmen, and they put out this mail order CD. It was like mail order only. I was like, of course I need this. So I sent the $9 cash, and I never received it, probably because the cash didn't make it. But so I asked my mom if she could write a check. So I sent a check. I got the CD with a letter from Joe that I like hung up on my wall because it was like written by Joe, and it was like, "Thanks for the check." um, but then I had his address now, so writing to him, and then I sent him a tape that we recorded, Baby's First Summer recorded, and he was like, "I really like it. I would like to record you guys." And we were like, "What?" So this is after the Milkmen broke up. It was like '96, I guess. So he came to their house and he recorded us, and then we went back to his house, which was the house where the Dead Milkmen practiced. So I like got to go down in the basement and like I was like, wow, this was where like the Dead Milkmen practiced. You know, it was like we were mixing it in his basement. That band kept going until about 2001 when Tim moved away. He went to live in Los Angeles. But by then I'd been playing with the Low Budgets with Joe. And that started because Chris from the Low Budgets was going to Temple University in Philly, and so was I. And I had already met Chris a few years before, and he was like, "Hey, you play bass, right? So we should start a band called Steve and the Sea Deer." And he's like, "Because I met this guy named Steve who plays drums," and he's like, "And Joe will play organ." And I was like, "This sounds crazy. Like this is never going to happen." And the next thing you know, I'm coming over to his house and he's writing songs and I'm playing bass lines to them. And then Steve shows up and then Joe's there and then the Low Budgets formed.
That's crazy. Like, just even the fact that in the 90s you could track Joe down like that. I've got his guitar. I've got his guitar pick like blue tacked to my light switch, along
Nice.
with Chris Rest from Lagwagon. His guitar pick's also on there as well.
Cool.
But were those all the bands you were in before the Dead Milkmen? Did we miss any out?
Yeah, I played in a band called Vakepor, which the full name of the band was Mike TV and his Osphocious Tabernacle Choir, featuring vegetables and Kevin's extra pair of ribs. So this was the birth child of my two like closest friends back in like post high school, Kevin and Chris, and they wrote within a few months. They wrote 50 songs, and the lyrics are ridiculous and like crazy stuff, and music is like all over the place. And we made some recordings, and they wanted me to play bass, so I contributed like musically to it. Like I would play like keyboards on something, or even like trumpet on something. We couldn't nail down a drummer, so we had like 3 different drummers at any different point. We played a few shows, but yeah. And then my friend, that same Chris from that band, he and I did a bunch of like weird experimental projects, and one where we were pretending to be little kids. We had a voice transformer, and we would just have like the demos on Casio keyboards playing, like how you can like change the key of a song. It'll be like and then we would just make up lyrics with this like little kid's voice, and it's absurd. Yeah, I feel like there's never been a time where I'm not like somehow making music or playing in some kind of music. I wish I had more time to like record stuff. I was doing that for a while, like putting out like solo stuff, and I still write stuff all the time. If I have a student not show up to a lesson, I'll sit in my room and just like, I have a piano in my lesson room and a guitar and a bass and a little drum set. So I kind of like write stuff.
Were you good at drums?
Well, so I learned how to play drums from my cousin Tim from that band, and he's left-handed. So whenever I would sit down to the drums, like I learned how to play left-handed. And when I was playing with the Low Budgets, Steve was right-handed. So I figured out how to play right-handed. But I would not say I'm good, but I will say in the last 6 months I've gotten better, because when I started at the music school, my boss, who's the owner, is really cool. He had a Ween shirt on the day I interviewed with him. I was like, this is going to go well. He was like, of the instruments that you know how to teach, like talk about this. I was like, piano, guitar, bass. He was like, ukulele. And I was like, yeah, I do that. And I was like, I know mandolin. He was like, what about drums? I was like, let's put drums at the bottom of the list. And he's like, okay, but you could do it. And I was like, yeah. and I wanted the job, so I was like, yeah, I could do it. That's just like my weakest link. So fast forward to August of last year, and I start working. I've got piano students, I've got some guitar students. And like 2 weeks into it, he was like, oh, so I've got a whole bunch of students for you because one drum teacher left. And I was like, oh. And then all of a sudden I had 8 drum students. I'm like, okay, all right, let me sit behind this kit and figure some stuff out before I start teaching these kids drums. Luckily, a few of them, more than half of them were like beginner. So I was like, all right, let me just show you what the drums are called. Let me look this up. Like, a couple of them are like intermediate. So I was like, shit, I got to have like a challenge for these kids. So, but since then, now I have 14 drum students. So I've stepped up my game on learning drums and like rudiments and stuff. I feel like this is some kind of, I don't know, divine intervention or something to be like, this is the one instrument you never really conquered. So you're going to have a ton of students to teach.
Well, you're in a band with Dean, and he's like incredible.
Yeah.
Probably my favorite drummer that doesn't drum hardcore, but he can.
Oh, he totally can. We did a cover of Bloodstains last weekend when we played these shows, and Dean fucking nailed it. Like, I don't know how that guy does it, and he does it with a smile. And he I think like he did some like marching band stuff. Like that's where he got his start with like music. So I always think about that when I think about Dean's style, which is why he can like keep it up. He doesn't slow it down. He doesn't speed it up. But if we speed it up, he keeps it up with us. Like if Joe starts a song too fast, Dean will keep it up. And sometimes I start nutrition a little too fast, but Dean keeps it up.
You know what? The most impressive thing that he does, it's seen in the making of the Punk Rock Girl video. I've seen him do it other places, but it's where he's hard to explain. But he's doing this on the hi hat, so the hi hat's constantly going like that, and then in between he's hitting the snare and he's going
That's like right wing pigeon does too.
Yeah, and he switches it up and it gets crazy, and I don't know, I drum on the edge of my bed, like that's how I work out how I want my beats to go.
Yeah, no, it's funny, since I've been like I said, like upping my game with drums, I've been watching Dean at practice a lot more often and seeing like the different changes that I took for granted before, like the different toms that he changes to, or the different, like he'll be like doing the ride here, or he hits a ride crash or something. And but yeah, his work with the hi-hat and the snare is great.
Well, let's get into the early days of the Dead Milkmen then, because I wanted to get your take on what happened with Joe, because he was the front man, he was the guy that wrote and sang all the songs. Then suddenly he took a massive step back and he only sings one song, like 1.5, 2 if you want to count like his secondary vocals. Why did he step back? Why did Rodney take his place? I
think, well, the whole band concept started with Joe and also his like neighbor, this guy named Garth. They started making these little tapes with some songs and like comedy stuff, and Rodney heard them and wanted to be involved. And at first he was playing drums, like basic drum stuff. This is before Dean or Dave Blood, because Joe and Rodney went to high school together. So then when Joe went to college, he met Dave Blood's brother, who introduced him to Dave Blood. They started playing, and Rodney still had a year left of high school in Joe's first year of college, but they still like talked and hung out and stuff. So then Rodney and Dave and Joe got together, and so they were looking for a drummer, but they were like writing stuff, and Rodney was writing a lot of stuff. Joe was writing stuff for Rodney to sing or do what he does over it. There's a great recording out there. It's probably I'm sure it's on Joe's website and like one of the bootlegs of the month. And it's Dean, Joe, and Dave in, I think, Dave's basement. And Joe's singing every one of the songs because Rodney wasn't fully committed to the band at that point, or he was, but he wasn't able to make it to practices all the time. So the first time that Dean met Rodney was at the first show. And Dean says that he was kind of confused too, because he thought that Joe had been practicing and singing the songs with them. And then Joe was like, oh, this guy is going to sing the songs at the show. So yeah. And I guess Rodney stepping into that like front man or front person role is probably what had them say like, yeah, this is how it should be. Because I mean, you've heard him talk. He's very smart. He's very funny, and he's quick. The guy could do improv like nobody's business. And I think he also, the way he moves on stage, even to this day, like the guy is all over the place and it's great. And I think Rodney has just such a, like, he's so prolific with these things that I think he was like churning out songs, and like Joe and Dave were focusing on the music more, you know?
So do you happen to know what lyrics Rodney wrote in those early days, like say for the first album?
That's a good question. I can't think specifically like who wrote what. I know that Dean wrote Dean's Dream. Like almost like exactly how it is, like he had written out his dream.
That's a hit, by the way. That might as well be a hit. It's such a good song.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Laundromat song. There's like a vocal hook. I think you'd call it a hook, where it's like if I don't see you again, my love, I will surely. That it's like, I don't want to say it's like the Beatles, but the hook itself is like, it makes the song, it makes the whole album worth sitting through just to get to that. The album's great anyway, but that song is so good.
Yeah, there's so many moments. To me, there's so many moments with Rodney on that album that, like, not that I don't miss Joe on it, because he does Dean's Dream, and what's another one? Well, he's doing backing vocals all over the place on that. But yeah, I guess. And then what on Eat Your Paisley, he does I Hear Your Name.
He has the best
a lot of people.
That song, I think it's Take Me Apart, where he has that screaming part near the end. That's the best vocal performance on the album, I thought.
Totally. Yeah, I've heard this kind of question, especially in regards to like where there was another switch with Soul Rotation, where it was mostly Joe singing, and that a lot of that was Rodney was kind of like doing more stuff on keys. But I think there's always been this like, and I see it even now with like my involvement with the band, like how they write, you know, like the song Astral Dad. Rodney was like, Joe, you should write a song about an astral projection dad, and then Joe did. But yeah, so and I kind of like that my brain kind of lets them go together, like almost like Lennon McCartney, you know, like can't tell who did what really.
What's your favorite Dead Milkmen song from the early days?
Ooh, that is it. Well, I can tell you my favorite song to play live is Smoking Banana Peels. But as far as like for listening, shit, that's a tough one. I'll just say The Fez, because it's like my least favorite song.
I love Rodney's voice on that song.
Yeah. Hello, Colin. You know what song I really love, and I feel like I'm definitely like moving and like pumping my fist every time, is Anderson Walkman Buttholes and How. It's the last song on Metaphysical Graffiti. It's like da-da, 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 and Rodney has some crazy like synth sounds happening.
That's my least favorite Dead Milkmen song, by the way.
What?
Oh,
wow. All right, so what's your favorite Dead Milkmen song?
What, from the early days?
Yeah.
It would have to. Oh God, it's Dean's Dream or the Laundromat song. I like them equally, but I've always preferred Joe's voice. before I got a look at him, I saw him as like a nerdy guy with big square glasses. Like, if you can picture that guy singing Punk Rock Girl, that kind of fits. That's how I pictured him.
I thought that the first song I heard was Watching Scotty Die, and I thought that he was British because he almost has this kind of weird way of pronouncing in this voice that, like, it reminded me of, because let's see. Yeah, I had heard The Cure at that point because Friday I'm in Love had been a hit. And in my mind, he reminded me of like Robert Smith, at that young age.
That's exactly why I did that when I covered Watching Scotty Die. I showed it to you, didn't I?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I did that. I've got a cutie. I did like an oi kind of intro. And then it went into like awesome. Cross punk.
Yeah.
The first time I heard Watching Scotty Die was a female acoustic guitar player, just some random girl on YouTube. I heard Punk Rock Girl, and I was checking out other songs like when YouTube was first a thing, because I'd only heard a couple of songs, and that one came up, and I was like, oh man, I've got to check this one out as well. And then that album's so good. It's like there's a bit of an electronic feel to that whole album. The production quality is very sonic, very electric. Don't you find that?
Drenched in reverb.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they recorded it in like a silo or something.
Yeah, well, it's still a great sounding album, if you ask me. I mean, it's got one of my favourite songs to drum along to, that Blood Orgy song, that has that big, like, poetic thing near the end. I don't know why I just thought of that just now, but that's one thing that sticks with me. Like, if
art. No art. No art.
And then you've got the dance track as well, which is often blended with what's the other song that the Swordfish song? They sometimes blend those tracks together. But there's that footage of Rodney with the do the junkie and then do the
monkey and the honky. Yeah, the honky. Honey, I think our new neighbors are ethnic.
Oh man, yeah, that's a great album. But then obviously how do you pronounce it? Beelzebub.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you think of that album? Because I think that's the fan favorite, isn't it?
Well, I mean that has Punk Rock Girl and Smoking Banana Peels, Stewart, and Life Is Shit, which seem to be like pretty popular as far as like what we play in the set nowadays, or since I've been playing them. Those are staples for sure. There are definitely some from Big Lizard too. I definitely see in like a Venn diagram of fans, like people liking both of them, but I also see a lot of people who kind of turned away from Beelzebub and on because it wasn't hardcore enough, but like they love Big Lizard in My Backyard because they, like you were saying, like they put it up there with like hardcore albums. And then there's some people that like gravitate more toward Beelzebub and beyond, which includes like Soul Rotation and still like Big Lizard, but like prefer more of like where they were kind of branching out into different.
Yeah. Well, they had that MTV connection as well at the time, which wasn't really welcome. But what was your take on that? Was you because you just discovered the band, I guess, shortly after the MTV thing?
That would have been like 89, I guess. So, and maybe about 5 years later is when 4 or 5 years later, I discovered them. And it's funny because I vaguely remember having seen the video before, but not thinking anything of it. Because in 89, I would have been 11. I would have been like knee deep in like violin, trumpet, piano, and handbells. Like no time for that. I'm listening to the Back to the Future soundtrack.
So we should definitely talk a little bit about Dave, because you've stepped into his shoes and them are some pretty big shoes to fill. So would you, I mean, you don't have to say this just because you're in the band, but would you put him up there with some of the greatest bass players of all time?
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of who else is up there for me, What's interesting to me about Dave, amongst many things, was like the discovery that he was 27 years old when he started playing with those guys, or 26, 27. And that was his first band. So I feel like I look back on that with that knowledge that I only gained within the last, like, I mean, I've always known his age, but I never really put it together. But when I figured it out within the last like 10 years, like I thought, wow, he was bringing something different to the band because he was still kind of new to the instrument, and he was a fan of like jazz and bebop and like the Beatles and definitely punk too. But he was born in 1956, so he, by the time, you know, Joe and Rodney and Dean were discovering like punk, like Dave was already like in his 20s, you know, like um so I don't know. I mean, this is all just me, because I think about Dave a lot, because I definitely looked up to him. When I went to see them, it was their last show. um I purposely went and found where Dave was standing and went like as close as I could to the stage to like watch what he was doing. um so yeah, I never got to meet Dave. I I met his brother and became friends with his brother Kurt, back in like the low budgets days, and I would like pass messages to Dave through Kurt. I would be like, "Tell Dave he's the best bass player ever," and then the next time I'd see Kurt, he'd be like, "Dave says you're crazy." And I'm like, "But he acknowledged I said something cool."
Well, would you say he invented that bass style? Because I've heard that said at least a couple of times.
I can't think of any other, like I said, when I put him like up there, I can't think of anybody else who does that kind of thing. Um, and it's been an amazing experience. Like, it was great as a fan listening to Dave's bass playing and watching him play live, but having to learn his bass lines has been like educational for me, because he does some weird shit. Like, he'll play these notes, like going back to watching Scotty die, just listen to it. um, like when Joe's saying like it came back colored yellow, like Dave's doing this and it works. The notes work, but he chooses these interesting notes to play, and I hear it all over the place. The end of Life is Shit, like the way he's climbing down. And for years, I confess this in one of the big questions. For years, I was playing the wrong bass line at the end of that song, and then one day I listened to it. I was like, "Oh wow, he's going here with it." So did he invent that style? I mean, it's hard to even pin down what the style is. Um, but you don't hear much of that, like moron do 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 do, or nutrition is similar to that, like do 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 do. Like, who was doing that? You know, I don't know.
The only band that I can say I really listen to that sound anything close to you guys is the Minutemen. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole nother bass player. He's got his own thing going on as well. I mean,
Oh, totally. I know that they were aware of each other, and I think maybe even fans of each other. Milkman played a show or two with the Minutemen, which, when, man, I geek out all the time when these guys talk about shows they played. Like, oh, remember when we played with the Shadowy Men and the Shadowy Planet? And I'm like, wait, what? Ah,
what would you say was the most difficult bass line to learn then that you have successfully learnt?
oof. Wow. I think one that I walk the thinnest line has it's fairly repetitive in what it does, but it does do this like climbing down thing over the chorus. But then there's this like little like instrumental like solo-y part, where Joe and Dave are both climbing up the neck like do 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 do. And this is a perfect example of something that Dave does that's totally, in my mind, like unique and original. He works within this scale, and he's playing the right notes in this interesting order, especially contrasting what Joe is doing. like they're doing similar things, but they're working within like thirds or something of each other. And I overthink these things, but like next time you listen to that track, like you'll hear what I'm talking about. It's like, I guess, the bridge of the song. Yeah, another one. Let's see. If you love somebody, set them on fire. That was another one that felt good when I quote unquote mastered it, which is debatable because every once in a while I still hit like certain wrong notes. But it's cool. It's like all over the place, but again, repetitive. Like he'll like play this weird thing, but he repeats it. So, we've never played the Big Sleazy live, but I love the bass in that song too, especially in the beginning.
Which one's that? That slips me.
That's from Metaphysical Graffiti. It's like he's like railing against all these radio stations.
Oh, that's that one that has that guitar part that's like. And
then Dave, it's like yeah.
I remember I heard so many different versions of that album because like people would upload it on YouTube and they'd cut those little those improvised vocal parts
Yeah.
out. And then the track listing would get all weird. But that's a great album. I think you told me before that was your favourite Dead Milkmen album.
I think overall, that's what I would consider. Yeah, that's the one where I look at that album and say, because of that album, like I said much earlier, like I branched out into so many different styles of music. Like, and I kind of use that one in my mind as like what really kind of like pushed me around, like to look around at other stuff. Yeah, it's all over the place.
Well, let's talk about those reunion shows from 2004.
Yeah, those were like Dave had died in March of 2004, and pretty quickly after that, like within a few weeks or months maybe, Kurt, Dave's brother, started talking about doing like a tribute show, and he talked to Chris from the Low Budgets, who was instrumental in helping that come together too. And then by November, we played the 2 shows. So I guess we started practicing in the like summertime.
Yeah, well, let's get deep into that because I want to know what the band dynamics were like as you stepped in at that time.
Low Budgets played a local show at a bar, and before we were playing, like I had like started drinking some beer, and Joe was like, "Oh, we're gonna do at least one like tribute show for Dave at the Chalk. Do you want to play bass for it?" And I was like, I don't know. That's let me think about that. And it was weird. My blood like ran cold for a second. I was like scared of this idea. Of course, I'm drinking a little more, and then the Low Budgets play this set, which was like the bass amp blew at the end, and like I think I like fell over or something, and it was like I was just kind of drunk. And then I go up to Joe and I was like, you know what? I'll definitely do it. I know every one of those fucking songs. I'll totally do this. And it was the kind of thing where like the next morning when I woke up, I was like, I think I had to call Joe, and I was like, did we really have this conversation? He's like, yeah, we're going to do some shows. And I was like, okay. So then they said, this was like, Joe told me like I could audition for the band. I didn't actually find out until a few years later that they didn't have anybody else play. I thought that they were literally like auditioning me and like checking out some other people too. I met them at where we still practice to this day. This place called East Side Studios in Philly. And that was where I met Rodney for the first time. I had met Dean already. And that's a whole other story. But yeah, I don't know. I still find it odd how I prepared for this. Like I didn't really sit down and play along to the songs. I had already spent like my teenage years doing that. So by the time we got into practice, I just had to look at Joe, who I already knew. I'd already been playing in a band with him at that point for 4 or 5 years. And I would just kind of like see what key it's in, and then play it. And we spent 2 hours doing this, and they were like, all right, well, this was great. Like, we'll let you know, or whatever. And then, of course, they asked me to be in the band. And at first, they would pay me for practices and shows. Like, I was like a hired hand kind of thing. So we didn't know how. Like, 2004 was there was no pay. This was a benefit show for Dave and a Serbian monastery that he supported. But yeah, so I was like in 2008. I guess I jumped ahead a little bit, but
Well,
yeah.
do you know if the band had jammed without you? Because they must have took a break for, at that point it must have been 8 years, nearly 10 years at that point.
Actually, yeah, it was about their last show was that I saw them was October 7th, 1994. So, or was it the 8th? So 94, yeah, this was 2004. So, I think Dean had done some music. He and his wife had a child in the 90s. Rodney was in a band called Burn Witch Burn. Dean was playing with Big Mess Orchestra, and then eventually also with a project that Joe had started called Butterfly Joe. Joe never stopped. Joe was in tons of bands and projects.
He's probably got thousands of songs.
Oh, tens of thousands. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think, to my knowledge, Dave didn't play music after the band broke up.
Do you know what happened to him? Like, what was good? Did I misread this, or did he visit Yugoslavia and attempt to help rebuild it after some attacks or something? Have I made that up?
Well, he lived in Serbia for a couple years, and he ended up leaving because he was being bombed so bad, like NATO bombing. He had close friends, some that didn't make it, and I'm glad you asked that because it reminds me I need to talk to someone about this, because I had talked to someone. I don't know, Dave like has always kind of been somewhere, like, I don't know what I believe like spiritually, but I feel like Dave has always kind of hovered around near me. Like, he like visited me in a dream, and I recorded it when I woke up. And I feel like I've always been curious about that time. Like, what I don't hear anything about him being like a religious or like spiritual person, but there was a Serbian monastery that must have been really powerful, like profound to him. Or at least the people there, because that's where like his estate is. He never had kids. So like royalties and all the stuff that like Dave's name makes, like, as far as I know, it goes to this like Serbian monastery. So yeah, he studied like Eastern European economics in the States after the band broke up, and that must have been part of what inspired him. They had also toured Yugoslavia in the early 90s, and I think he fell in love with it there.
Do you think he was mentally well near the end?
No. Like I said, I never met him personally, but from what I hear from not only the band, but both of his brothers, he didn't grieve well after their mother passed away. That was a big part of his struggling. I think he was pretty close with his mom, and she died in like January, I think, and then he died in March. So, yeah.
Well, so when you got into the band, was there ever a moment for you where you felt like, oh crap, I'm not Dave? Like, because for me, you've carved out such a nice place for yourself in the band that I end up listening back to early Dead Milkmen and thinking, man, Dan's ripping some bass on this song, and then I have to remind myself it's not Dan, it's Dave. Like, were there ever moments where the band members had to say, like, well, Dave would have done it like this?
Yeah, I have like anxiety disorders, so like that already is going to happen with me, feeling insecure about my role, especially like thinking if I were a fan, would I approve of this guy? You know, like what do people think about CJ Ramon? And he didn't even replace a dead guy. You know, that was like Dee Dee needed a break. Um, I did struggle. Well, at first in 2004, I was like, this is just a 2 night thing. Like this isn't me. Like this is me respecting Dave. This is me like helping to ensure Dave's legacy gets a little more life. You know, like um. But then in 2008, when we started playing, and then they asked me to be like a partner in like the LLC, like part of the band. That was another moment that was hard for me. Um, I will tell you this: I have only heard encouraging and kind things from people regarding that. Nobody's ever said anything to me like "you're not as good as Dave. Dave was better." Nobody's ever even come close. Um, I can tell you that I take I take it as seriously as I need to, if that makes any sense. In the beginning, I was kind of I would ask Joe like certain things that Dave did, and Joe would tell me like Dave didn't do a lot of open strings. He would play the fifth fret instead. Like it has a different tone. So I would do that. I would play exactly what I heard on the record. I wanted to just fill in for Dave, you know? But when I started writing with them and recording with them, I kept this mindset of like being a fan, what would I want to hear? And there were times that I'd have to be like, oh, maybe we should do it like this, thinking like from a fan point of view, like it's not necessarily like would Dave do it like that, more like would the Dead Milkmen do that? And Dave was obviously a huge part of the band, yeah. And now I've surpassed the amount of time that he was in the band. But I also was getting like I get messages from people like randomly, like through Instagram or even email. And a lot of times they're like between the ages of 16 and 20. And I think, holy shit, the whole time that the whole time they've been alive, I've been in the band. Because our shows are, if it's an all ages show, you've got 14 and 15-year-old fans there, but you've also got like 65-year-olds there. It's an interesting, I met, you know, a good friend of mine only heard the Dead Milkmen for the first time in his late 30s, and he fell in love with the band and wanted to come, you know, see us live. Like, but then you have like the 14-year-olds that are just getting into it, and I don't know. There's something really cool about the band. There's something in my mind. There's something like long lasting about it.
So how were those tracks for the King in Yellow formed? Like, what were you guys using back then?
Yeah. So we each have, or at least had, like our own like little like home recording setup, like basic stuff. And when we started talking about writing, I think Dean was the first one to send a demo. So the demo had like him playing, he has an electronic drum kit, him playing drums. There's a little basic bass line and a guitar line, instrumental song. Joe sends, usually this was back in 2009, like the end of 2009. Joe would send something that had like him playing guitar, sometimes with a beat, sometimes with vocals. Rodney would have like a beat and bass and like keyboard sounds. I had like a little either acoustic guitar or I'd have a keyboard or something. And we just started sending demos through email. I sent the Meaningless Upbeat Happy Song instrumental email, and within 24 hours, Rodney sent one back with the music and almost what he says on the recording now, like a different version of it. This is one of the pivotal moments of my life. Like, I'm not kidding. And this isn't the kind of thing like my kids would understand if I explain why this is a pivotal moment in my life, but like you would understand, like my cousin would understand, where it's like being a fan of this band and then being nervous to send this instrumental track that I felt sounded like a Dead Milkmen song. And Rodney says he like heard the lyrics underneath and recorded them and sent it back to us. Yeah. And Some Young Guy was another one I had a demo for that Joe wrote lyrics for. Rodney had sent a very interesting demo for the Norah Jones song. What is that? Bohemia. It was just the lyric, his words with like this weird like rhythm pattern underneath. But in the same kind of way that he felt inspired for the lyrics to Meaningless Upbeat Happy song, I heard like a bass line and it ended up being that do 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 do, which is on the track. Hangman was one that we all kind of like. There were parts that had like Dean wrote the lyrics. Joe was like, we need some kind of like driving bass line, and I was like, do 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 do. He's like, okay, and then how about this chord? That one we wrote like in the rehearsal space. It was that whole thing was an amazing experience. Not just listening to the demos and like dreaming what they were going to sound like, but when we got together and like fleshed them out, like they took me seriously. They took my contributions like, wow.
So what's your take on why the band started recording music again after having such a long time away?
For me, it was we played the Fun Fest in, I think, November of 2008, and to warm up for those, we did two like relatively secret like surprise shows in Philly like a week or two before that, just to like get our chops in and see if it was worth it. And at this point, we were just planning to do this festival because they offered a lot of money and hotel and airfare. So we go out and we did. It was awesome. It was such a great experience, that festival, for everybody. We all enjoyed it. Rodney gave his keyboard away at the end. He had a DX7 or a DX11 or something, and he like gave away. Somebody brought it back up and he gave it away again. I think he ended up getting it back like many years later. But I think we were all just kind of like, all right, this was fun. Like, and then Joe was doing a solo set at a bar called Beerland in Austin after the festival. So we were all like drinking because we had nowhere to go except this hotel room. We just played this great festival. So Rodney and I are talking, and Joe's about to go on, and then we're talking about how much fun it was. And then Rodney puts his hand on my shoulder. And he's like, I can't wait to record with you. And then he walks away. And I was like, what? So, it took, I guess it was about a year later when we started sending demos. Like at that point, I had 2 kids. I have 3 now, but so one of them was like a baby back then, like a newborn baby. So it was, I was pretty committed to that. So it was, we weren't doing too much in that first year, but then like 2009, we started playing more, like the Riot Fest, and we did a Halloween show. And then, then the demos just started kind of flooding in. And then we found 2 different studios to record in to try them out. And the one we ended up recording several times with, Minor Street.
Was there a label involved at that time?
No. So like shows that was another setback as far as like doing an album. We needed to play shows and make some money. So I guess that's why it took so long to get into the studio, because we didn't actually get into the studio until the end of 2010. It was like November, December, I think we recorded. Was it 17 songs, I think? Yeah, because we did 10 at the one studio and 7 at the other. And wow, that came out in March. That was a pretty quick turnaround. But we didn't do vinyl. We put that out ourselves, too.
Well, Rodney's so actively against vinyl, isn't he?
Yeah, and I get what he's saying, and he says like, oh, vinyl made a comeback, and it shouldn't have. Like, but to me, vinyl never went away. Like, when I was a teenager, sure, there were CDs, but records were cheaper. You could find 7 inches for like $2. Like, why am I going to buy a CD of a band I don't know, and when I can buy a 7-inch for cheaper? Like, I had a record player, but I'm 45, so I grew up listening to records and then cassettes and then eventually CDs, but records never like went away for me. So I don't know.
So what's your physical music collection like?
I have a lot of CDs and a lot of like burned CDs. They all because of just moving so many times and like having like family and stuff. Like I've condensed them all into like those black books, like the with like the sleeves inside. Like I still have like the artwork and stuff, but I've saved like a dozen jewel cases in case I want to get like 12 of them out and put them back in their case. But yeah, and my records, I lost a lot of records in a flood. I was able to save probably like 50 of them, maybe. Um, so it's modest. I don't have a big collection.
What are you most proud to own?
Maybe the Mr. Bungle Disco Volante record because it has like a third groove on it, and there's like a 7-inch that came with it. And it's got different artwork. And it was something that I was searching for a long time, and I found it in a record store in Canada. After looking at like every record store I'd go to all the time, never finding it until this one store in Canada. Yeah.
Are there no record stores open near you?
There is one called Positively Records, which I used to go to as a teenager that is still around. They moved one door down for some reason, but they're still there. And the last time I was there, it was still the same motherfucker working there, who I thought was old 30 years ago.
Well, there's no record stores here. It's like they open up and they're around for a couple of months and then they all just disappear. But getting onto the recording of Pretty Music then, because I think I heard on Big Questions this was one of your favourite ones to work on. I totally missed when this album came out, so I got to just like discover it and beat the anticipation. But can you talk a little bit about how the band decided to start working on this one?
That originally came out of this, and this is a weird little factoid, but somehow Rodney had been talking to the musician Ryan Adams. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I wasn't very familiar. I did look into his music after that, and I was like, oh, it's decent. Somehow he was a Dead Milkmen fan, and he and Rodney were talking, and then he wanted to do a conference call with all of us. So we did this conference call with him, and he had this idea to put out some Dead Milkmen singles on his record label. But he wanted them to be like the old hardcore punk. Like, here's somebody who was like more of a Big Lizard fan than any other stuff. I'm not even sure he listened to any other Dead Milkmen albums because he kept referring to Big Lizard. But he had this idea, and we were talking about it. And we were like, okay, we got off the phone and we were like, all right, this is interesting. Let's see what we do with it. So we sent him 5 or 6 demos. I can't remember which ones. I should look at the email. And basically never heard from him again. But we liked the idea. So we were like, hey, you know what? Let's put out some singles of our own, like an A side and a B side. And then we ended up doing a C side that was available for like download. Like, so if you buy the record, it has the 2 songs on it, but it would have a download card on it, and you could go online and get the 3rd song for free or whatever. And what I liked about that is that we were in the studio, like, I don't know, 4 times that year because we we did 4 of those.
This was 2013 or 2012?
I think we started in 2012. Then 2013 we did some, and then 2014 we went in and did 6 songs and added that to all the ones we had put out for singles. And that's why the vinyl is different than the CD, because the vinyl only has the 6 songs plus the 3rd sides of each of the singles. So the mentality was, if you're going to collect vinyl, you're going to collect the singles and then this like EP-ish kind of thing, which is like the rest of the songs. It's too complicated. The CD has all of them, you know. This is the kind of band where like as soon as the microphone is on in practice, Rodney is using it. Joe is like turning the amp on, tuning, and then he starts just like playing something. I'll have my thing turned on. Dean's putting his cymbals, and I hear what Joe's playing, and I'll start like, dun, just like some basic thing. Sure as shit, Rodney just starts like making stuff up. And then when Dean set up, he's like, da, 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 and he just comes in. This happens almost every time. And I wish that we just like recorded these practices, because there's these little gems that just will never be heard again because they're completely improvised. But to me, it's a testament to the chemistry of the band. And it's amazing that I've been able to, I don't think I've like stepped into Dave's role, but I provided like a different part of it. But to see that the three of them still have that, a lot of the songwriting was like music writing was Joe and Dave getting together and doing that. Joe and I don't do that. I wish we did. I wish we lived a little closer to each other. But I like this process. They obviously didn't have that back in the day because they didn't have like email or like easy home studio setups in the 80s and 90s. So I can't speak to their songwriting process other than what I know, with Joe and Dave getting together a lot, working on music.
What kind of equipment do you use, like, in the studio?
For a while, we were recording stuff like on tape with Minor Street. So Minor Street was like 6 or 7 of the songs on King and Yellow. All of Pretty Music. And a couple single, like little things like Prisoner Cinema and this one we did for a comp. But I thought it was kind of weird, and I get why we did it, but it always ends up digital anyway, like, and then mixing through like Pro Tools and stuff. So there's like something to that, but we haven't been doing that with the newer, like the studio we go to now is called Sign Studios in Philly. That's where we've done everything since Welcome to the End of the World, and then the Fascist Groove thing, and then all of the new album, Quaker City Quiet Pills.
So are you guys ever hands-on with the mixing? Do you ever like sit in on the sessions?
We're all ears on. We all hang out while Matt and Mike, the guys from the studio are also the record label guys, the Giving Groove. So that's convenient, but they also are part, like they're doing mixing physically while we're listening and we're commenting. We're saying, let's do this, let's do that. I have this, do that. Yeah. It's very interesting. I've heard of like nightmarish stories of bands not getting along in practice, in the studio, on stage. Nothing with us. There's like a totally drama-free.
Were they still in contact in that big gap that they had in the band?
Not as much as I think they would have liked to, especially, knowing that like Dave was gone. They did get together to do commentary on a DVD in, I think, 2003. So about a year before Dave passed. They got together for the Philadelphia in Love DVD. And it's a great commentary, and it's the last time the four of them are all together. But, and like I said, Dean and Joe did some music, some projects together in like the later 90s. And I think Burn Witch Burn and Butterfly Joe played a couple shows together too. So I think they always kind of kept in contact. But I, started playing with the Low Budgets in like late 99. And up until Dave's death, I would periodically ask Joe, like, when are the Dead Milkmen getting back together? Why don't you guys do this? And he'd be like, nah, it's never going to happen. And, I guess sadly it didn't with them.
Yeah.
But
you kind of saved the day a little bit.
It's funny because like, it touches me each time I hear it, and I hear it a lot, like people thanking me for helping the band continue. And I always think, my first thought, like, I'm a very self-deprecating person. My first thought is like, it could be anybody, but it's not. It is me. And I'm incredibly grateful to be as big of a part of this as I am.
Yeah. but kind of a fun, dumb question. If it wasn't you, who would get your approval? A well-known bass player who would get your approval?
Well, she's not that well known, but my friend Audrey is probably as big of a Dead Milkmen fan as I was and is, and she is a way better bass player than me. She's a music therapist. Like music is like her life too. And she's a friend of the band too, so they all know her. She sang vocals with Rodney on the song Little Rebel Mine, which was a cover, which it didn't make it on the I don't think it made it on the CD for Pretty Music because there were like the guy who wrote the song wasn't down with it, I guess. But if you look, you can find it somewhere. But Audrey does the vocals on that. But yeah. And when you started asking the question, like before you even got to the end of it, I was like, Audrey. And as a matter of fact, if I ever, for whatever reason, were to decide to leave the band and become like a monk or something, I would be like, guys, I'm going to pass the baton to Audrey. Hopefully she doesn't watch this because I want it to be a surprise. But
So, what do you think are the funniest lyrics that the Dead Milkmen have ever come out with?
That's a good question. Stewart is a classic. You can't, there's so much in that. That's a very Dead Milkmen defining song in my mind. And another one, I Dream of Jesus, which is in a similar vein with like Rodney ranting over the music.
Are they both improvised?
I think for the most part, I think Rodney gets this kind of like bare bones idea, and every time he does it, at least before the recording, like he'll add like a little thing here and there. From what I've seen with like Meaningless Upbeat Happy Song and what's the one on the new one, How Do You Manage to Exist? Like he does end up in some of the studio situations like improvising something that like cracks us up and surprises us. But yeah, as like the Earls, as they call them, like from Metaphysical that get cut out sometimes, those are totally improvised. And that was a way of finishing out extra tape. Like they didn't want to just like leave all of this, like let's say there were like a couple like inches left of tape. Like, let's just use it all up because we're paying for it. So they're like, do, until the tape would run out.
Did they invent doing that? Because I don't think there's any other band that has those little things like in between tracks.
I've never come across it. I don't know.
Yeah. And then they get longer as they go, and then that closes the album. Or did it originally on the original pressing? Because again, there's different versions.
Yeah, it's definitely the end is that long Earl about like the dog pussy and yeah. That's definitely another factor into why that's my favorite album. It's not the main factor, but it definitely adds to why I like it. Those Earls.
Yeah. And that album got reissued recently, didn't it?
Yeah, I think last year, 2 years ago, last year. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember anyone reaching out to you to get that going?
Yeah, the label that we're currently with was a part of it, and they asked me to do something for it. So I wrote like a little thing that was like everything I needed to know about life I learned from Metaphysical Graffiti, and I just took little things from like the lyrics and made a little like commentary kind of thing. But yeah, a lot of that stuff they talk to me about it and they ask about it because I am like an equal partner in the band, even though I had nothing to do with the original album. They still ask me about stuff, and I contribute little things to where they're reissuing Bucky Fellini for the next record store day. So keep your eyes out for that, which I think is April 20th, maybe.
Okay, I didn't know anything about this.
Oh yeah, this is like relatively new announcement. I think it's been announced. Yeah. Well, it has now.
Well, I think I own every official release that the Dead Milkmen have ever done. And we should probably talk about this record. Because this is the only record that a member of the band has actually sent to me. And I think this was Joe's actual physical copy. Like from his personal collection.
Wow.
Because I paid for this one. And the grooves throw the needle out on The Coast Is Not Clear. So I contacted Joe to see if it was like an issue with the pressing, and he didn't know anything about it. So then I got in contact with the Giving Groove, and they didn't know anything about it either. So we just ended up going back around in circles. I was like, "Can I just buy a copy off you, Joe?" And then I think that was his personal copy, unless he had two lying around.
That sounds like Joe. He does. I think he still does this. He always did with the old records. He buys a copy when it comes out for good luck.
And then he signed
Nice.
that guitar pick. I'm just showing off now because
Yeah.
this is about as exciting as my life gets. And then I got a package from you. I rarely ever touch these things because I'm afraid like I'm going to take the essence of the Dead Milkmen away from them, but I think this is signed by the band. I don't think you'd forge the signatures.
No, I got them to sign it.
And that's Joe's guitar pick as well, isn't it? So I'm just like collecting Joe's guitar picks now.
What's the last song on there besides Life Is Shit?
Well, that is it, I think. That's what I was about to bring up as well, because I don't think I've ever seen you guys play Life Is Shit live.
Huh.
And then we got the handwritten note, which of course is written on that.
Yep.
I haven't had a chance to colour that in yet, but...
Yeah, I got that out of a Presbyterian coloring book. I used to work for a Presbyterian church. I was like the sexton, so like the maintenance guy, and I took a bunch of those out of there.
Yeah, and then you sent me the 4GB data disc with the early Joe material on it, which I was listening to recently, and I think I told you I rediscovered my love of that song, Raoul.
Oh. Yeah.
Dude, that is better than anything the Beatles have ever done.
Raoul, she loves you. I know, dude. I did a cover of that one time for some reason. I should dig that up and send it to you. It's pretty crappy though.
Oh, who cares? Why did that song never come back? Because that, to me, that's like the clear song that should have been resurfaced at some point.
It stands out. Like there's a couple songs on those early, like a lot of that early stuff. It's great to listen to, but every once in a while there's a song that you're like, wow. And like Raoul is definitely one for me where it's like, wow, this sounds like it could be like a Beatles song. You know, like it's beautiful.
I think I requested Joe to play that live for the next time he does a live stream. I don't know if he'll remember to do it, but I really
Remind
wanted to
him.
do it.
You'd be surprised. He'll end up doing like some deep cuts if you ask him.
Do you think he would do an interview with me as well? I guess he probably would.
I think so, yeah.
But I doubt Rodney would.
I don't know. You never know. He likes to talk. He did go. There was a period of time where he said like I don't want to do interviews for a while, but I don't know if he's still in that. It wouldn't hurt to ask. Dean probably would too.
I've never got through to Rodney. I don't think he would tolerate all of the wires everywhere on me.
But he's not a dick. I don't know. It's hard. Rodney is an enigma because like he's not a dick, and he usually ends up being like funny with his frustration. So you don't, there's no like fuck you. We're not like fighting each other. It's just like he'll let out his like little irritation and then move on to the next thing. Yeah.
Have you ever seen him strangle anybody?
No. I've never seen him strangle anybody.
So, I wanted to talk a little bit about taking a joke too far, because there's some Dead Milkmen lyrics that in today's times might be seen as offensive. Like you mentioned earlier, that Some Young Guy song, like, that's dark.
Yeah.
Can you remember, like, after you sent the demo, was it the lyrics that got shown to you first by Joe, maybe?
I sent the demo, the instrumental demo, and Joe sent an email where he hadn't recorded vocals, but with lyrics, totally different. It was like I think, if I remember correctly, it was like a straight guy who was interested in this woman and referring to himself as some young guy. This is the thing. I told him, I was like, this is a working title for it. Like, I was thinking of like Cream of Some Young Guy, which was like an old joke from, I don't know, Wayne's World, maybe. And I was like, don't you take this as the title? But of course, he just took it as the title and wrote these lyrics. And I remember being like, oh, wow, this is interesting. And then he was like, I changed the lyrics up a little bit. And then he changed them. And then all of a sudden he had those. And I was like, wow. Rodney added the, what is it, shotgun paper bag bottle of wine.
Yeah. So, and then there's something about super glue.
Yeah, super glue the skull or something of some young guy. Yeah, that just kind of happened, and I was like, okay, well, it is the Dead Milkmen. We can kind of get away with stuff.
Well, since you've been in the band, have there been any other songs that you thought might have been pushing it a bit lyrically?
Not anything that comes to mind since I've been with the band, but obviously, there's Taking Retards to the Zoo, which is kind of like,
Yeah, I noticed on Big Questions, Dean wouldn't say the word retard, would he? And I'm sure that I've said it multiple times a day, every day since 1997, and mostly in reference to me. I say it about myself. I think people took it and it became a bad word. I don't necessarily see it as a bad word. Where do you think he is with it? Why wouldn't he say it?
I think it's like the N word, it's like, it's people don't like, or like the F word for homosexuals, like people like group it in. And I can understand that, because when I hear it, I kind of like, but like you used it a lot before. And I can tell you for sure, I've never referred to a special needs person as that or would call them that. So my whole thing with that word is, I can understand people being offended by it, but personally, like you're saying, I would refer to myself as like, oh my God, I'm a retard, or like I'm so retarded. Like, why would I, like, I'm not going to see like somebody with Down syndrome and be like, hey, so when you're not using the word appropriate, and the same thing went with like the F word for homosexuals back in like the 80s and 90s. Like anybody that was using it in my friend circle, calling each other, they weren't a homosexual. It was just like using that word as like just to kind of,
Yeah, well, I don't recall there being anything in the song itself, Taking Retards to the Zoo. There's nothing really malicious in it. It's kind of just a silly song.
He's driving a bus and he's crashing it with them in it. I don't know.
But that's not on purpose, though, is it?
I don't know. I hope not. I mean, I guess he made it out enough to write the song. But did they make it?
Yeah, it's just a fun, silly song. That's the way I see it. And it's still listenable to me today. But that leads me on to the film Pink Flamingos, because Rodney brought that up not that long back, I think, on Big Questions. And I thought, okay, if people take jokes too far and they do things like that in that movie shows someone eating a real dog shit.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of...
And fucking a chicken.
So where are you with that? Can you watch that sort of thing today?
I think so. I watched it when I saw Pink Flamingos. I was probably 17 or 18. And I was definitely like grossed out, but watched the whole thing. And then I watched subsequent John Waters films. I actually got to see him speak and got his autograph on something. I like that stuff. I like stuff that like pushes the envelope. It seems hard to do nowadays in a couple of ways. One, like to be extreme enough, and two, like to be able to use certain types of humor without people getting upset.
There's a lot of that nowadays.
I swear it was Mojo Nixon. Somebody said anything, you can make a joke about anything as long as you're willing to deal with the consequences of it. Like, if you think it's funny, like, say it and just expect that some people may, give you a hard time, but learn to deal with that.
Yeah. That leads us on to GG Allin, because I've talked with you in the past about GG, haven't I? And I thought, what if GG was around today? Like, how would you feel about him? Or, a more interesting question, since you've got 3 boys, haven't you?
Yeah.
What would happen? How would you react as a parent if you found them watching GG Allin videos?
That is a great question, because I first saw one when I was either 15 or 16 and felt disturbed. But I also, unfortunately, my friends and I watched like Traces of Death and like Faces of Death. And these are videos of like people actually dying. And I regret it in a way, because I feel like it kind of like disturbed something in my brain to see this. And like, the realization like later that like, oh my God, that was like a human being. Like, and I watched them die on like video. It's upsetting. That being said, like, my parents had no clue, just as much as like if my kids were hanging out with their friends and that was happening, I would have no clue. But they have way more access to that stuff. They didn't have to find a copy of the anarchist cookbook from someone's cousin that they borrowed, or like find these like basically these snuff movies, these Faces of Death, like from like a video store. But we had to get his older brother to rent it because he had to be 18 or older, and it's in like the back room where like the porn is. But like I don't know. There was something like it almost was like this desensitization. So to see something like GG Allin, that was a performance, and he wasn't like dying in it or whatever, but to be cutting himself up, to be like shitting on stage, like beating people, unfortunately, like raping people, which goes a little too far. But at the same time, if you watch, like I think we talked about like that interview where he's talking about, you come to my show, like you're expecting that this could happen. Not that it's like a green light to do it, but like anything can happen kind of thing. And I'm fascinated with that idea. My kids, if they were watching it, like I would I would talk with them about it. Anytime my parents saw something that had questionable like lyrics or something, like they talked to me about it, but they didn't give me a hard time. They didn't say you can't listen to this. They just wanted to talk with me about it.
So would you have to explain that this is some form of extreme performance art, or would you bring the punk rock thing into it and say there's no limits, there's no rules here?
Yeah, I mean, and like what he was saying is like he's the ultimate rock and roll person, because rock and roll is supposed to be about rebellion and not caring about like the rules and stuff, which as we talk about, now is like the punk rock kind of thing. Yeah, and I would make sure like my kids, they're 17, 15 and 13. So they're kind of like ripe ages for certain stuff, but I'm glad they're not younger if they were to see that kind of stuff, because I don't know everything that they watch on the internet. But I do like to talk to them about like, how do you feel about that? Or what is your opinion on that? Like if I saw them starting to cut themselves because GG Allin did it, like we'd have to have a talk. Yeah.
Do you like any of his music?
Like Band in Boston is pretty good. Like I never really got that much into his music. It was more, to me, it was more like, okay, this has to exist. Like this extreme has to exist, and he can't exist forever. He could not have made it into this era. He wasn't supposed to if he was making the real statement that he was. Like he wanted to kill himself on stage, which he didn't get to do. But I wonder what would his legacy be like if he had? Would it have been different? Would it have been this like complete? Would he be revered in the future, like as this prophet of punk?
I mean, his name really was Jesus Christ Allin, so
yeah.
there's something there. But that brings us back onto music then, because Joe also sent me this.
Ooh, yeah. What do you think?
Dude, this album is so good. I'm not just saying this. Like, there's never been. Firstly, like, the Dead Milkmen's one of those bands that I need to own everything by. It's just important to me. And I don't mean to jizz all over you, but I don't think there's any other bands that have been going for 40 years that are still putting out really good albums like this. And I won't remember the song names because it's still new to me, but Grandpa's Not a Racist, that has to be easily the best Dead Milkmen opener for any album that you've played on. And probably one of the best album openers for any album in the last 10 years. But there's hardcore on here.
Oh, yeah.
In, what's that song, The Master Race?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And, dude, the Butt Spoon song.
Yeah, classic Rodney.
I don't know if you've checked out my YouTube videos of me drumming on my bed, but I tried to drum that song. I've got like blooper videos of me screwing up. I tried to drum the Butt Spoon song, and I just start cracking up. I can't drum because I'm laughing. So I've heard it 40 times at this point, and I'm doing sit-ups. I'm working out. I'm listening to the song. I can't move. Like, I'm paralysed because it's too hilarious, you know?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how that song came together?
That was one similar to how I was talking about Bohemia. Rodney had the lyrics, which was him like ranting about standing in line, and there was this very bare bones like rhythm track underneath. I couldn't hear any like tones or like pitches at the time. I did end up turning it up later with like headphones, and I could hear a little bit. But to me, I heard this like a bass line, and then for the next part, this like down, and I was like, I don't know if this is what he's intending for this song, but let's talk about it. So I brought it to, I didn't do like a recording of it, but when we were in the studio, I was like, all right, I mean, not studio, the practice space. So we always, I was saying we always get together, work on the songs, flesh them out. And yeah, that just kind of came together like in the studio with like Rodney's lyrics and then my idea for this like kind of driving bass line. And then Joe comes up with what he's doing, which, he opens it with that. And then, of course, Dean, just without missing a beat, literally, like comes up with that. That's another one that's like magical to me, like how that came together. That was one where we had to we really did have to work out an arrangement because Rodney had certain parts of the vocals where I could feel like, okay, this needs that like more intense kind of like the like we have to do that a little longer, and then maybe the next time it's a little shorter, and then we do a double toward the end. We just kind of had to play around with it until we found what worked best.
Does Joe ever laugh at this stuff? Because I don't think I've ever seen him crack up.
Oh yeah, Joe laughs all the time. He doesn't have a very like boisterous laugh, I guess. Like I feel like I crack up all the time. Even in the studio too. I can't remember what song. It might be that one where we do like because Rodney did have the how there's like that melodic like I hope you die, and like Rodney had that musically for it. And at the very end of it, we're singing backing vocals. I think you can hear me laugh. I think it's that song. Rodney has this way of just making me crack up. I don't know.
Could he get through the vocals without cracking up?
He's pretty good at that. I don't know how he does it, because if I was saying half the shit that he was saying, I'd be cracking myself up. But he goes on like some of these, like there is like, I hope the studio guys still have it. There was a song we did, and Rodney told this like whole story over like this instrumental part, and it is fucking hilarious, but we didn't use it for the album. But he just like makes this stuff up and he just goes, and Occasionally, yeah, very, very rarely I have seen him like say something where he's stopped because he's laughed. But he gets into his zone. I think he feeds off of everybody else laughing.
I love how aggressive he can be with the vocals, like on Meaningless Upbeat Happy Song, which is my favourite song from that album. Just the way he comes out with like, do you suffer from depression?
If you don't, you probably should. Yeah.
So we should probably wrap up with like any funny stories from the road, if anything comes to mind.
We almost crashed a van in Dallas, of all places, because of an ice storm, which was crazy because Dallas is not known for their ice storms. But they are known for their like overpass, like bridge highways, which will freeze before anything else. And yeah, we were in a van on a highway going to Dallas and totally like spun out and then got stuck like that in this exit ramp, which was crazy. I have a picture and it's like Rodney like waving next to like the van, like in the middle of the highway. Those guys have some crazy early days tour stories. Yeah.
Oh yeah, hopefully I'll get Joe on to tell me some of them. Crazy fan encounters. Has anyone ever like super fanned out?
Not for me. No, I've had more people like super fanned out that like I know Joe or can I meet Joe? Can you introduce me to Joe? Yeah, sure.
What do you think?
I've had some moments. I've had awkward moments where like people, like I had a guy come up to me and Joe and ask me to take a picture of him and Joe, which is not that it's not that awkward. And actually, the awkwardness didn't hit me until after I realized, oh wait, he didn't want to take a picture with me too. Probably doesn't recognize me. Like what's nice about my role is I can go watch the opening bands, and very few people actually will. Since Big Questions, that's changed a little bit. I get recognized a little more, but I've gone a long time without being recognized until after the show. But like hanging out in a town, not being pointed out or known, or like walking past the line to get into the show and people don't recognize me, like that's kind of nice. But at the same time, I also really like talking to people because it's a band that I always liked too. So to be able to connect with someone as a fan is cool. But also being able to like, you know, say, oh, sure, I can get that signed from all the guys, you know, you run back there.
Do you think Big Questions is going to come back? Because it's taking a break right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it'll come back. I'm not sure how. I don't think, at least at first, it'll be like every week. Like part of it, I mean, part of it was tough for me because I work 3 days a week and then I work each night of the week. So like Tuesdays I have off during the day, which is why this worked for us. But like I'm getting home from the music school and I've got it like a set up for Big Questions, you know, and I'm doing it and I love it. We did it for 4 years, you know. We are doing, and you know, this is like, well, by the time this, I guess, is out, it'll have already aired. But we are getting together. We're doing a video call tomorrow night to talk about the shows that we had last weekend. And we're going to have like a little Big Questions behind the scenes or whatever from these shows last weekend.
I don't want to take credit for it, but I think I might have put the idea in your guys' heads about doing the album discussions. I think I brought that up quite a lot.
Dude, it worked. And not only was it great discussions, but like people love to hear about it too. The only one we haven't done was Welcome to the End of the World. And I brought that up the last time we were practicing. I was like, that's the only, I mean, I guess that's an EP or whatever, but yeah.
Well, dude, I was so excited when I saw that Big Lizard video pop up. I was like, what? And then you gave us exactly what we needed as well. Like, we needed to hear from you, like, how you discovered the albums for the first time, you know?
I'm not sure if everybody else is that thrilled about it. I've seen comments that are like, why does Dandrew sound dead inside? Or like, we could skip over listening to Dandrew talk about the album. I don't care.
Well, I noticed you had a guitar there. Do you maybe want to close us out with some Dead Milkmen riffs?
Like, you have a request?
Oh, yeah. Is that a guitar or acoustic bass?
Oh, you know what? Hold on a second. Let me get the acoustic bass. Yeah. This my brother-in-law lent this to me like 20 years ago, and I still have it.
Yeah.
Let's see. You have a request, or do you want to just?
I really have to see how Little Man in My Head goes.
Ooh. There it is. Maybe it's. You know, it's funny. I just happened to know that by chance. We've never played that live. That would be great to play live.
Yeah.
Ooh, that'd be fun because we could kind of like jam out on it too for a sec. You know, Dean doing some like dub stuff with the drum. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just happen to know that because I love that bass line.
What about Set Someone on Fire?
Ha! Let's see. Yeah, and then it's just that repeated.
Is there anything that you've never mastered on bass from like Dave?
I'm trying to remember the bass line for Do the Brown Nose. That was one I was gonna say I've never really mastered, never really like tried. I think almost every song I've at least tried to figure out bass line. Yeah. Meaningless upbeat happy song 2 3 4.
Do you suffer from depression? Well, if you don't, maybe you should, because the world's a violent, ugly place, and the only people who can't see that are idiots in the blind.
It's nothing without Rodney's lyrics.
Don't trust the happy are insane. When you see someone smiling, run, get away.
I think this has been one of the most exciting moments of my life.
Wow. I've had a blast, dude. This has been great. Thank you for being patient. You know, you've been trying to do this for a few months.
Yeah, and thank you for being patient with all the crap that I've had to deal with around. All right, man.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, thanks.
Thanks a lot, dude. I'll catch you later. I don't know why I've got this record 3 times, but...
All right, cool. Thanks. Bye.
All right, see you later, dude.